Welcome to Conversations with Sekani, a podcast for people in their 20s who are trying to figure out life and not get lost along the way. Today's guest is Alice Miles, a survivor speaker, domestic violence advocate, and social work professional dedicated to educating communities about healthy relationships, trauma, and healing. Alice has spent years working directly with survivors, healing them, healing them, and helping them navigate unsafe situations through safety planning, advocacy, and support. Her work also shines a light on often overlooked survivors, including LGBTQIA+, male and military communities. In recognition of her impact, she received the 2021 Recognizing Why Resiliency Media Award from the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence. Wow. Okay. Alice, welcome to Conversations with Sekani. It's a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you for having me, Sekani.
All right. So, Alice, I want you to take us back, right, to your 20s. What was life like? Should I say, who were you then? And what dreams or ambition did you have for your future?
Well, in my early 20s, I was still in the middle of my social work programs pursuing my
Mm.
degrees. So, for those who aren't aware, when you're pursuing becoming a social worker, there's about 3 degrees that you need to become licensed to start, right? That's an
Mm.
associate's in social work, a bachelor's, and a master's. And typically that's going to come along with some internships in clinical and non clinical settings as well. But in my early 20s, and especially when my particular domestic violence event, interaction, stalking event, whatever you want to refer to it as, happened, I was in the middle of my associates, really just starting out and trying to find my place in the field. I had originally intended going into child protective services because I had felt particularly called there, not only because of my passion of working with children, but also because of my own childhood experiences as well. And so at this time, I
Mm.
was really hopeful. I was excited to learn a lot, and I was really just looking for any opportunity I could to get into the field.
Wow. Oh, all right. So, looking back, right, what would you say were some of the biggest lessons or challenges that you experienced during those early years?
Well, I would say some of the biggest lessons would be to step outside of hyper independence. Because of my
Mm.
childhood experiences and really what led me going into college and pursuing social work, I was particularly guarded. I had a lot of beliefs that my circles were supposed to be small. Asking for help meant that I was a burden or causing harm for others. Really, I just tried to take on the world a lot by myself. I was overextended in a lot of areas for sure. And so throughout my experiences, I learned not only to start asking for help, but what it means to receive support, how to receive love and care and support in beneficial ways versus what I had experienced up until that point, manipulative and exploitative methods that ultimately led to harm.
Mm. Yeah. Oh, all right. Thank you, Alice, for sharing your journey with us, right? And yes. Okay. So I want us to touch on advocacy, trauma, and healing, right? So you began your speaking career focusing on teen dating violence, right? So why is it so important to educate young people about healthy relationships early in life?
That's important because, and one moment, I apologize, I had to clear my throat. I would say
Mm.
it's important to educate youth and early adults about healthy relationships and what that looks like Because when you're a teenager, your dating interactions are actively painting your love map. They're
Mm,
actively wiring your nervous system and shaping your beliefs about love, about intimacy, trust, what it means to be connected to another person, who you are in connection to another person. And so if you don't have those guiding lights or just those milestones to create some structure about what to expect, what's healthy, and where you need boundaries, even what boundaries are, right, and the value that they hold. I think it's a lot like being thrown into the fire and you learn through
mm,
your lived experiences, which are valuable.
mm,
That said, there are a lot of people who go into their 30s, their 40s, and on into their later years in life wanting retrospectively to have a chance to have done something differently if they had knew differently, right? Often one of the
mm,
hardest hurdles that we overcome in healing and recovery is forgiving ourselves for what we didn't know and for not
mm,
having the tools and support that we needed. So education really goes down to opening up access and awareness to what that support looks like, how to gain access to it, and really destigmatizing and even de-stereotyping who needs that support.
mm, mm. Oh, all right. And most times, or should I say the teenage years, right, is almost like one of the formative years for people. And like you said, you can get into dating and probably your first relationship or your second might just subconsciously teach your nervous system that this is how a relationship is supposed to be, right? So it's important to educate them before going into, any form of relationship so they can tell when something is wrong and when something is right, which is really important. So another thing is, domestic violence is often misunderstood, right? So what are like some of the biggest misconceptions people have about abusive relationships?
Well, I think one of the most common misconceptions is the belief that abuse is wholly or primarily physical, where abuse is something that comes in layers. It's something that escalates over time and is really insidious because of how slowly it builds in and really invades your life.
Mm. Worked with many different communities, right, including the LGBTQIA plus, involved in males and military survivor, basically. So why is it so important that conversations around domestic violence include everyone?
Well, I think it's important to be inclusive in domestic violence education and awareness because of the misconceptions that can be built in those blind spaces, right?
Mm,
Connected to your last question, when it comes to marginalized communities and minorities, when it comes to domestic violence as survivors, men, military members, minority communities, and people of color, especially, have less access to resources and less education to those resources. And there tends to be heavier stigma and even stakes in accessing those, right? So we know that one of the most dangerous times for somebody who's in an abusive relationship is when they're trying to leave it. And with
mm,
that in mind, there are so many barriers to separating from an unhealthy or an abusive relationship that it really kind of stacks up against you depending on how you identify your background, even the assumptions that somebody might make upon you about you upon your presentation, right? So if we look at the military community, for example, the stakes can be pretty high because there are not only your nervous system, let's say, responses that are influencing trauma reactions in the relationship, but they're also influencing those relationship dynamics themselves and what options you perceive as accessible and available for improving or increasing your sense of safety overall. So within
mm,
the military, every active duty military member works really hard for their credentials, their education. They climb their way through the ranks and they want to take care of their team members and their communities. And that comes with a lot of sacrifice. And within a healthy relationship, a victim or a survivor might be worried that in the process of becoming safe, that they're going to cause harm to the abusive individual's reputation or their career. And not only is that really connected deeper to the the intimacy of their relationship and the fear that's been woven into really prioritizing the abuser's needs over their own, but it also really speaks to where the stakes become that much higher for if you do threaten that career or that reputation, and how that can trigger abuse or decrease safety for somebody in need almost immediately.
Wow. Alice, right? This is, I don't want to say totally unrelated, right? What I'm about to say. But I just remember the conversation I had with a friend, right? That told me she would rather be in a relationship where she's physically abused than being in a relationship where she's emotionally abused. I brought this up because we are talking about, abuse, right? Abuse that occurs in relationships. And I need the listeners to know that it's not sometimes abuse are not just physical, right? It could also be emotional. It could also, it comes in different ways, right? So what do you think about that statement that lady made? And what do you think about, abuse generally when it comes to relationship?
Well, I think to start, I would say that my heart speaks to your friend here who stated that, because I think it's very raw and it really speaks to wanting to be seen and witnessed in the harm that she's experienced. I
Mm,
remember expressing something very similar throughout my own experiences, because emotional abuse, psychological abuse, it's something that you can't necessarily see. You witness the impact of it, right? Mental health and even
mm,
physical health symptoms show up as symptoms of the abuse itself. But we don't see the scars physically that can last for years to even decades as echo of these traumatic experiences, right? So, wanting or even preferring physical abuse opposed to emotional or psychological, I think really reflects to how, if your abuse isn't something that's seen, if it's something that's harder to document or find evidence or demonstrate to somebody else, which is often where most abuse occurs, right? Abusers are just as strong at grooming allies as they are at grooming their victims. Well, then you have a lot less access to support, and especially where it can save somebody's life, being believed when you're talking about your experiences and opening up and being vulnerable about needing safety and reaching out to somebody for help and getting that.
mm. Whew, okay, so I like how you dissected that, right? And thinking about it, most of these people who are in some form of emotional abuse, it- it's even more difficult because they can't leave, right? When you're trying to explain to someone and there's no physical, no signs that you were beaten up or something. So it's almost difficult for you to tell anyone or somebody that this person is, abusing me, but it's not physical, it's emotional, right? They just think you're delusional or something. So the thing is, most of these people in such situations, apart from what people would say, they find it difficult themselves to leave such relationship. I don't know, I think they call it trauma bonding, right? So what's the psychology behind this actually?
Well, it's not only psychology, but it's also physiology when it comes to the
Mm,
conversation around trauma bonding, right?
mm,
Trauma bonding comes with a couple of different ingredients, and it's a slow process, almost like what I talked about with emotional and psychological abuse, because trauma bonding is both of those things. right? It starts with love bombing. This person gives you heavy amounts of praise, gives you lots of gifts. You feel like you're the most important or special person in the world to this individual, right? You feel loved. You are riding on a high, essentially. And that high is coming from what's chemically happening in your nervous system and in your brain. So not only are you basking in serotonin, which is our happiness chemical, but you're also getting hit with a bunch of dopamine. And dopamine is our pleasure chemical. Now, knock that up with the intimacy that comes along with many, let's say, relationships in domestic violence, but aren't the only representation of domestic violence relationships. That oxytocin that's also released in the calm stages of the cycle of abuse, right? In the love bombing, oxytocin is our bonding hormone. So when you're love bombed, you're getting bathed in all of these beautiful chemicals that make you feel really, really good, right? And usually that's a wonderful thing. Typically, those chemicals are what help us with feeling safe, with help us feeling connected. They help us with even building trust and expanding the relationship itself. We become more deeply attached to our partners or our loved ones. And I really stress that this can also happen with loved ones because domestic violence occurs not only in intimate relationships, right? But it also happens in family constellations. It happens with roommates and neighbors. It happens in the home. So once you get through the love bombing and you're building that relationship, that's where trust and a sense of dependency is starting to form. And so is attachment. You start to learn that you can lean on this individual, and maybe they start dropping hints that they want you to only lean on them, that they are your end all be all, that you can't trust anybody else, right? And that's when it starts slipping into the next stage. We get into criticism of who you're hanging out with, the clothes that you wear, the food that you eat, your beliefs, the things that you like and what brings you joy. A bunch of jabs and judgments and lashes that lead you to feel bad about yourself and experience guilt. Maybe shame comes up for you, right? Or feeling small because you wanted to share something that lights you up and, well, it was just shot down. So now you're feeling confused because you just come from like this huge high in the relationship, basking in good chemicals, to feeling really low. And so naturally in relationship, we try to do what's called repair. We try to talk about how that hurt us and how we'd like that to not happen again. But that's the next stage. Now we're in a stage of gaslighting, and that person is manipulating the narrative. Now it's not, hey, your actions hurt me and I'd like this to change. Well, now you're too sensitive. Now you're making a mountain out of a molehill. Now they can't say anything right. Now you're the abusive one, right? They flip the script on you and they start creating doubt, and they really dismantle your sense of trust in reality itself, so that that dependency that you had already started forming with them, well, now you're leaning even more into their judgment, into what they say happened and what's right, what's wrong, and how you feel, even what's okay for you to do, even. So now your nervous system has gone through highs and lows in extremes. Gone from the high, I feel amazing, I'm on top of the world, to the mountain, all the way down to the pits and the bottom of the roller coaster with that sinking gut, right? And what that does is it really strings your nervous system along, because your nervous system wants all of those chemicals and responds to them with different functions. So for the cortisol, the epinephrine, and the adrenaline that's released when you're gaslighted, when you experience abuse, when you're hurt, you're threatened, you're scared, right? Maybe they're just intimidating you or threatening to do something. All of that is taking your nervous system into a threat response or a trauma response. And now the person that you are supposed to feel close with, who you're supposed to feel safe with, is also somebody who's your biggest threat in your environment. And your nervous system splits in its confusion because now it's identified that this person is a source of really, really good high, good feeling chemicals and crushing lows. And it wants to experience those highs and those lows for different reasons because your nervous system is adapted to respond to those chemicals to keep you safe. So, we're not even all the way through the trauma bonding process, and we're already learning how your nervous system is constantly adapting, right? Even in ways that can feel counterintuitive. And what we often see in abuse and domestic violence, the fawning response. Now, your nervous system has learned to stay safe. You have to people please. You have to
Mm.
appease this threat, this abusive individual. Because if you don't, well, then you're getting hit, you're getting torn down, you're getting gaslighted or criticized or threatened. Maybe you're being told that you're stupid, even, right?
Mm.
And so, through that process, not only is your nervous system addicted to those chemicals that are working its way invisibly, but we also have that loss of self that's happened through the nervous system adapting to fawn,
Mm.
to appease, to keep you safe. Because now we don't see that line that says, I am here and you are there, and what separates us. Now we're blurring the boundaries. We're enmeshed and we're trauma bonded, predicting and even anticipating another person's needs so that we can stay safe. And at that point, that's typically where resignation and submission tends to come into the conversation as that final ingredient because we've learned through coercion, through abuse, through habits, and what your nervous system has been picking up throughout all of those experiences that no doesn't work the way it's supposed to anymore. Anger doesn't work the way it's supposed to anymore. Boundaries don't work the way they're supposed to now. And that's what tends to induce what we call helplessness. No doesn't work, so we stop using no. We stop using boundaries, right?
Mm.
And this is where a lot of guilt, a lot of shame comes in, and a lot of self blame tends to happen for survivors as well. But what they don't know at this time is that this is how your nervous system is working so hard to keep you safe. And it doesn't feel like it's safety, it feels like it's betrayal of self because it is. But it's the only way that your nervous system knew to keep you alive at that time.
Oh, well, honestly, Alice, I want to say thank you for sharing this with me, right? I really, now I understand what trauma bonding actually really means. Wow, that was a really, really detailed analogy, right? And oh, okay. So regarding that, right, I would like to ask, what do you think? What would be your best advice to someone in that situation, right? Because with the way you explained it, this person knows that they actually want to leave. They know it's not safe, but their nervous system makes them feel safe whenever the abuser is around. So it's almost like they are conflicted among, like within themselves, right? So what advice will you give to someone in that situation to, better leave the situation?
Well, what I would start with is validating their experiences and asking them if they feel ready to try to leave this situation, right? Because
Mm.
this is how their nervous system has adapted to stay safe. And that might mean that they don't recognize the abuse or that they're even okay with it, right? That they've normalized it somehow because it has been and has been reinforced in their lives as well. So I would start with recognizing that and coming from a non blaming approach, right? And asking them, maybe even giving them some of the language and options of what resources and support they need to feel ready to leave that relationship. Like we touched on earlier with the barriers, when your nervous system doesn't see any other out, right? That's typically when we shift into that functional freeze and our fawn response. But beyond that, it has recognized that if we try to fight through it, that's going to put us further at harm, possibly risk our lives. If we freeze through it, that's probably not protecting us either. And we can't necessarily run away from it directly because that tends to increase threat and lethality. So it comes with really finding a balance in resources and timing on what increasing safety looks like for that particular person. Is that improving access to finances so that when that opportunity to leave arises, that they have the resources necessary to have housing, food, and even clothing and hygiene items, right? Sometimes it's a barrier related to children, to pets, and how to maintain their safety or meet their needs outside of this relationship. Oftentimes, there's going to be something that the nervous system is holding on to that says, until this need is met, right? We can't take that step and trust in increasing or improving safety because taking that step is what they've learned is the threat, right? So it's really about balancing safety and threat itself and building that trust and building in enough resources and supportive structures so that as that individual is leaving this environment, as they're leaving the relationship, that they also have good, authentic relationships around them to support them through it, that they have safe, clean environments to be in, that they have access to food, that they can meet their basic needs, and that they may have access to tapping into their hobbies or their interests, because those are really, really important when it comes to maintaining our capacity and maintaining the resiliency of surviving.
Wow. All right. So yes, thank you, Alice. And like I said, this has been amazing, honestly, deeply detailed and very insightful. And yes, finally, I would like to ask, right? Because my podcast is for young adults trying to navigate life. So for young adults who are building relationships, what qualities do you believe create, a healthy, safe, and lasting connection? Right.
Well, I think one of the first ingredients for a healthy, safe, and lasting connection is going to be respect. And respect can mean a lot of different things to people, but what it is it's a foundational relationship to recognize and respect where that line begins and ends between us. It's respecting a difference in needs, it's respecting a difference in perspective, right? And I would look
Mm,
beyond that respect to those who express care with safety, without expectation, right? And for many survivors, many who are in unhealthy or abusive relationships, they've learned unhealthy dynamics earlier on in life, often through childhood. That's painted their love map and their nervous system on what to expect or what to believe love, intimacy, safety, and connection looks like. So I encourage diving into what you want, what your
mm,
boundaries are, right? Getting into those deeper questions with self and saying, what leads me to feeling comfortable with somebody? Is that
mm,
based on their body language? Is that based on how they talk to you, right? Feeling safe with
mm,
somebody is going to be blended with how much you can trust them with and how much you feel safe within the environment with them and just being one on one with them. And those are all things that we are constantly scanning for within the nervous system. It's what we call neuroception. So when we're asking those deeper questions, try to sit with your body, with your nervous system. Ask, how do I feel around this person? How does my
mm,
body feel when I'm talking to them? Right? Can they respect my boundaries? Or do I notice that I'm on edge or I feel tense around this person? Because
mm,
the odds are, if you don't feel comfortable with being yourself and you're hiding aspects of who you are, what you need, or making yourself smaller to fit into that space, the less likely that it is that that's a healthy relationship.
mm. Wow. Oh, all right. So yes, thank you, Alice. I said this has been really amazing, and it brings me into the final segment of my podcast. I call it the rapid fire segment, right?
Ooh,
You could
fun.
either, right, you could either answer with a word or a phrase starting now. So, what is one word that describes your 20s?
What is one word that describes my what?
Your 20s.
That would be a roller coaster.
All right. So, what is a book that has had a lasting impact on you?
Oh, that is so hard. I am such a book reader, so I have to like consult my inner library and Rolodex here.
Mm,
I have to go to early childhood books, and that's going to be a tie between The Giving Tree by Shel Silverstein and The Velveteen Rabbit. And I don't remember the author of The Velveteen Rabbit.
Wow. All right. And yes, what is one habit that helps you stay grounded?
Oh, one habit that helps me stay grounded is I make space to ensure that I feel comfortable with my body and sensory experiences
Mm,
each day. So that's to tap in with my five senses on what I'm touching, what I'm smelling, what I see, what I hear, and even what I smell around my environment and in the environments that I interact with.
mm, wow. All right. And yes, finally, what is one message you wish every young person could hear?
I think something that would be helpful for every young person to hear is that there's going to be a lot of messages, a lot of narratives, and even moments that happen across your lives that tell you not to be who you are or that it's not safe to be who you are. And it's going to be really hard to hear this and even put this into practice. But if you can, try to resist those messages. Oftentimes, where those are coming from are going to be from unhealthy individuals themselves who are seeking to exploit, manipulate, or make you smaller for their own gain, or just because they feel threatened by the light that they recognize within you. So,
Mm,
when the world is pushing you back and telling you to be small within yourself, try to shine that light forward and trust in knowing that the light within me sees the light within you, and so will the good people in your life that you're meant to connect to.
wow. All right. So yes, thank you, Alice. And finally, before you go, where can listeners get to, learn more about you and also connect with you?
If listeners are interested in either learning more about me or connecting with me, they can reach out through my website, which is coffeetalkllc@outlook.com, or the same email, coffeetalkllc@outlook.com. Um, that said, I'm open for speaking events, connections, or even just a point in the direction for some resources.
Wow. Oh, all right. So yes, and personally, I'm gonna put the link in the show notes so it's easily accessible for listeners. And to my listeners, I want to say thanks for tuning into Conversations with Sekani. If this episode sparked something in you, just as it did in me, make sure to share to someone you think might need this, and also subscribe so you don't miss out on new episodes. Once again, thank you, Alice. You have a wonderful day ahead of you.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure being here, and I'm grateful for the opportunity.
You're welcome, Alice. Take care.